Hello world. We are anonymous. We as citizens are at the cusp of either a new beginning or a new end. The choice is up to everyone that is aware of what is happening. It's not enough to post online. It's time to wake everyone that is sleeping. They are usually the ones that still watch mainstream news and agree with everything that is fed to them. That is why I bring you this message. Show them the facts presented in this video. Spread this video, download it, copy it, get the message out. Make flyers and go to stores and put them in popular books and magazines. We as humans have the ability to overcome these odds. We cannot buy into the mainstream media's lies and falsehoods anymore. They are trying to divide us and get us to hate one another using race, religion and our differences. We must be united as one or face a government of one that will enslave us and remove the rest of our freedoms. Don't wait till the enemy is at your door to fight, cause it will be too late. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
I want the young motherfuckers in here tonight, no matter what your nationality is. Turn the motherfucking TV off for 1 week and see if you can survive. Motherfuckers are going to a television junkie motherfucking mode. Nigga, ain't no TV. I need my remote, nigga. I'm Jones. Nigga, it's called television programming. They telling you visually to program. You being programmed, nigga. You watch it on the news. It was on CNN, it's true. I seen it on Fox. It's real. It's bullshit.
Ashley Banfield from a parking lot in Phoenix reporting via satellite with Nancy Grace, who seemed to be in the same parking lot in Phoenix. I'm basing that, of course, on the fact that the cars that are passing by Ashley Banfield's location box also appear to be passing directly into Nancy Grace's box.
In consumer news, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny's step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny's step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny's step this year.
After faking a news conference, instead of facing the usual grilling from journalists, the Emergency Management Agency had its own employees, you see them sitting down right there, pretend to be reporters and ask the questions. Well, now the White House is responding.
It is not a practice that we would employ here at the White House, or that we certainly don't condone it. We didn't know about it beforehand. FEMA has issued an apology saying that they had an error in judgment when they were attempting to try to get out a lot of information to reporters who are asking for answers to a variety of questions in regards to the wildfires in California. It's not something I would have condoned, and they, I'm sure, will not do it again.
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of email overload?
Could this be the end of...
We're going now to Saudi Arabia and Charles Jaco. Charles, are you still hearing me? Charles
yes,
Jaco is just
the air raid sirens are just now going off here near these U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia. We've sent the entire camera crews inside right now. We're all preparing to put on our gas masks, as we've been told. There are sounds of planes overhead. We don't know whose planes there are, but air raid sirens are going off insistently. There are military convoys on both sides of me. We're being told to get off this platform and get inside into the air raid shelter immediately. But right now, everyone's been training for this, and it looks like we may have to.
All right, Charles Jaco, that doesn't mean that he is in any imminent danger. Of course, we can't know that.
CD, if you need to take cover, I notice that you've got your gas mask in your hands. If you need to put it on, please do so. If you need to take cover.
People are looking up in the skies, scanning the skies to see what they can see. Hi, Atlanta. We're about to have a short course in missile identification. This is a Scud. You can tell it by its distinctive label. Now, when the missile is launched, the first thing you look for is the plume sticking out behind it. Now, when you detect this, you can tell it's been launched. Thank you.
Graffiti on it? Yeah, show me graffiti.
Larry King show or bust. Je suis un journaliste américain. Wolf. 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 Oh, I love this country so much.
You guys just don't have a clue.
Well, Cheryl, it was almost exactly 2 hours ago when the sirens went off here in Saudi Arabia. Where we are in eastern Saudi Arabia, there was no problem. Now, let me just size my mask and fit it for a second, just like I always do. Stand by, please. All clear. They're... Oh, shh. What are they saying? Are they saying all clear?
Yes, ma'am. I can't hear.
Were they saying all clear down there just now?
Okay. Okay.
All clear. All clear. Está bien was a false alarm. Got that, Atlanta? Standing down now. I'm gonna go get my hamburger and my coffee.
Good. We just got the all clear.
All clear. Every time I order something, this happens. All clear. Thank you.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush pushes for a land war against Iraq. But polls show the U.S. public is split 50-50 on that idea. Then comes this eyewitness testimony before a congressional committee from a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl. The claim is she cannot be identified for fear of reprisals.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
The U.S. public is outraged. The result? Support for land war zooms. It's a turning point. Desert Storm is launched. 135,000 Iraqis are killed. An estimated 1 million Iraqis, many of them children and old people, then die as a result of 10 years of sanctions. One small problem. There never were any incubator baby deaths. Not one. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's investigative flagship program, The Fifth Estate, reveals the girl to be the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, given her lines and coached in acting by the giant American PR firm Hill & Knowlton. It's one phase in a $10 million joint U.S.-Kuwaiti campaign of deception. This man is lying.
I myself buried 14 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
This man is lying.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
There were a lot of people who participated in a conspiracy. Yes, an out-and-out conspiracy of fake organizations, false documents, fraud, and disinformation.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Right after 9/11, people were asked about Iraq, and only about 16% felt Saddam Hussein had anything to do with it. But with all of this propaganda coming out, Cheney and all those folks, about 28% believed that Iraq had something to do with it. 2 years after we invaded Iraq, close to 60%, 56% of Americans believed a delusion.
What did Iraq have to do with what?
The attack on the World Trade Center.
Nothing.
There are 5 giant multinational corporations who control all 14,000, virtually all 14,000 radio stations in America, all 5,000 television stations, 80% of our newspapers, all of our billboards, and most of the large internet content providers. So there are 5 guys who are deciding what we hear as news and information.
Iraq's continued defiance of the community of nations presents a challenge which must be addressed.
Presents a challenge which must
the
be
member
addressed.
for Grayndler.
It is inherently
dangerous to allow a country such as Iraq
to retain weapons of mass destruction.
particularly
in the light of its past aggressive behaviour.
If the world community fails to disarm Iraq,
we fear
that other rogue states will be encouraged to believe that they too can have these weapons.
Whitney Houston died in a swimming pool. She had more than twice as much coverage on primetime TV than 250,000 people who died in Haiti. Lance Armstrong was involved in a doping scandal. Oh, my God. Almost 3 times more attention than we gave to the death of 250,000 people in Haiti. So 3 years after the Haiti quake, there are 378,000 Haitians who are still living in tents. Our Wolf Blitzer is not covering that story, okay? He's busy trying to entertain us.
Continues to make the use of video news releases, which are prepackaged news stories sent to television stations, fully aware that some or many of these stations will air them without any disclaimer that they are produced by the government. Comptroller General of the United States this week said that raises ethical questions. Does it raise ethical questions about the use of government money to produce stories about the government that wind up being aired with no disclosure that they were produced by the government?
There is a Justice Department opinion that says these pieces are within the law so long as they're based upon facts, not advocacy.
Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline. 1,500 people are being treated.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 on 9/11 was a rare event. Our study has identified thermal expansion as a new phenomenon that can cause the collapse of a structure.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream.
You know the rest.
I scream, you scream. You know the rest.
We received an order from one of Murdoch's apparatchiks, if you will, that we should cut away from our newscast and start carrying a fawning tribute to Ronald Reagan that was airing at the Republican convention. We were stunned because up until that point we were allowed to do legitimate news, and suddenly we were ordered from the top to carry propaganda, carry Republican right-wing propaganda.
The U.S. State Department calls him one of the most significant financial sponsors of Islamic extremism in the world.
Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him.
He is a major terrorist financier.
Went into Osama bin Laden's hideout.
We are put in a minivan with curtained windows and drive west. As night falls, we move to a four-wheel drive vehicle that makes its way up a rough mountain path past checkpoints manned by heavily armed men.
Interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout.
Mr. bin Laden, you have declared a jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq.
This is a CNN reporter with a camera crew. And he came out and told everybody, within 3 weeks, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the United States and Israel. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. Some doofus, jerk-off reporter with a camera crew waltzes right into his hideout and interviews him. Now, that tells us two things. Either everyone in the intelligence community and all of the intelligence agencies of the United States government are blithering idiots and incompetent fools, including the entire apparatus of the FBI and all of their personnel, or they're lying to us. They're not looking for him at all.
I suspect your research has discovered the memoranda that were written by John Moody and by Roger in terms of setting the tone for the day. The message of the day is a very political device.
Let's spend a good deal of time on the battle over judicial nominations, which the President will address this morning. Nominees who both sides admit are qualified are being held up because of their possible, not demonstrated, views on one issue, abortion. This should be a trademark issue for FNC today and in the days to come.
There was nothing covert about the way the managing editors in New York or Washington operated. They made it perfectly clear what they expected from us.
The so-called 9/11 Commission has already been meeting. This is not what did he know and when did he know it stuff. Do not turn this into Watergate.
Every morning there was a detailed list of subjects to talk about, not talk about.
Kerry's speech on the economy at Georgetown is likely to move on to the topic of Iraq. We should take the beginning of the Kerry speech and see if other news at the time is more compelling. It is not required to take it start to finish.
They were just actually issuing edicts to the reporters to control what they could say and how they could say it.
Let's refer to the U.S. Marines we see in the foreground as sharpshooters, not snipers, which carries a negative connotation.
When headquarters sent a memo every morning and said, we want to touch on the following issues, we want to cover the following stories, we want to do them in this particular way, our job and our objective then was to execute the plan.
The pictures from Abu Ghraib prison are disturbing. Today we have a picture, aired on Al Arabiya, of an American hostage being held with a scarf over his eyes, clearly against his will. Who's outraged on his behalf?
So here's just a segment of stuff that will never appear on American television.
يضربوا المدنيين يعني؟
ايه مدنيين كله هذا بيت عمنا كله مدنيين لكم عسكريين كله مدنيين يضربون من الله ينتقم منهم حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل 5 جنازات من جنازات فقط بيت يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله الله انتقم منهم الله خلحقنا منهم وينك الله وينك الله.
So there are 100,000 stories like that simply do not get into our consciousness, and so we remain kind of immune from having to deal with the consequences of our collective behavior.
The documentary that we just saw a clip of never aired. It never aired on CNN International. Why not?
Well, I still haven't been given an exact reason as to why it didn't air. I went and visited with the president of CNN International, Tony Maddox, twice on behalf of my dumbfounded crew, and we were never given an answer. And so I started investigating the situation, Liz, after several employees who'd been at the network for years approached me and said, you need to look into this. There's something going on. It's very strange. They're not airing your documentary. And after some investigation, we found out that CNN International is actually making money from the Bahrain regime. They are a customer of Bahrain. Bahrain is paying CNN International to create content that shows Bahrain in a favorable light and then air, also not only to create that content, Liz, to then air that content on CNN International. And in one of the shows, it was called I List Bahrain. It was back in 2010. It was sponsored by Bahrain. And Richard Quest was live from the country for a week talking about the Formula One race and how progressive Bahrain was and how the Crown Prince was a reformer. Well, we saw in February 2011 that under the Crown Prince's rule, the military troops shot and killed unarmed protesters in broad daylight. And this is very dangerous because what CNN is doing, and they're not only taking money from just Bahrain, they've also produced similar content for Georgia, Kazakhstan, and other nations as well, Lebanon. And what makes this dangerous is they're not disclosing to the viewers that these sponsored programs are actually being sponsored. Or if they are disclosing it, it's in very small gray lettering at the bottom of the article.
Whether it's CNN or CBS or NBC, it's all fiction. People making the junk know that. The viewers suspect it, but where are they going to turn to?
It's Cyber Monday, a day on the retail calendar that can be enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or a couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or maybe the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
Enjoyed from the desk or even the couch.
Enjoyed from a desk or the couch.
From a desk or the couch. From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or a couch.
From a desk or your couch. From the desk or the couch. From your desk or the couch.
From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or a couch.
From your desk or the couch. From a desk or the couch.
From a desk or couch.
From a desk or the couch. From a desk or even the couch. From a desk or the couch.
Enjoy from a desk or a couch.
From a desk
or the couch.
From a desk or the couch. Or wherever you like, as long as you got internet.
This isn't really surprising to anyone who's been paying attention, though. The United States has had Syria and Iran in their crosshairs for a long time. The plans for these wars have been in the works for over a decade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
There are 3 primary psychological techniques that the powers that be in any given era use to build up the public support needed to take a country to war. 1. Create the impression that the aggressor is actually acting in self-defense, or in defense of a helpless nation. This can be done by exaggerating the danger posed by an enemy, fabricating an attack and blaming it on the enemy, or intentionally provoking the enemy into a response. 2. Build up a crusade mythology, one that presents the aggressors as fighting for a higher ideal, or for the good of all humanity. In our current era, the meme of spreading democracy, fighting terrorism, or defending human rights are the most commonly used. 3. Dehumanize the enemy. War is mass murder. Therefore, presenting the enemy as evil, barbaric, or subhuman is essential unless you want your citizens and your soldiers questioning the morality of their actions. This pattern is often supported and augmented by a sense of cultural or racial superiority. The way Islamophobia is capitalized on to build moral support for this phony war on terror is a perfect example. The U.S. government has a long, illustrious history of using these techniques, and they keep using them because they work.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. Of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
The United States has been trying to get Iran under its thumb for a long time. In 1953, the CIA and the UK's MI6 organized a coup to topple the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. They then installed the Shah as their puppet. The Shah, who just also happened to be a brutal dictator, ruled until 1979, when he was overthrown during the Iranian Revolution. The US didn't like that, so they tried to take Iran down by arming and funding Saddam Hussein against the Iranians. This was during the Iranian-Iraq War, which is also sometimes referred to as the First Persian Gulf War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988. The U.S. continued its support for Iraq even though they knew full well that he was using chemical weapons against the Iranians. This now declassified top-secret memo from November 4, 1983, documents chemical weapons used by Iraq and discusses Iran's likely reactions. Here's a second memo written on February 24, 1984 to the Director of Central Intelligence, predicting that Iraq will use nerve agents against Iran. Note that the source of these documents is Foreign Policy Magazine, which is an extremely pro-establishment publication by any standards. In spite of this, friendly diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Saddam continued. This video of Donald Rumsfeld, then Special Envoy of President Ronald Reagan, meeting with Saddam was taken on December 20th, 1983, which was after the first memo. This means that those running the U.S. knew Saddam was killing people with poison gas, and they didn't care. Taking down Iran was more important to the U.S. government than protecting human rights, and it still is. Saddam failed to defeat Iran, so the U.S. switched tactics, and for a long time they tried to go after Iran directly by accusing them of building nuclear weapons in order to justify military strikes. However, this line of worn-out propaganda didn't gain any traction, largely because the U.S. government had lost most of its credibility in their trumped-up claims about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. You can only cry wolf so many times before people start rolling their eyes. Their agenda fell apart completely when elements within the CIA and Mossad came forward stating that there was no evidence that Iran even intended to build such a weapon. Not to be deterred by little details like the truth, these chicken-hawk neocons decided to go after Syria to get to Iran. They know that Syria and Iran have a mutual defense agreement, and if NATO forces enter Syria, Iran will be drawn into the fight. And then these little deranged psychopaths in suits will get their war. We're talking about World War III here. This is not a game, people. This is by far the most dangerous crossroads we have ever come to in living history. If we let these psychopaths continue taking us down this path, the consequences are too horrific to even contemplate. We've been trying to warn people where we're headed and trying to show you that there's no political solution that will turn the U.S. government around. Voting the bums out is not going to work. The people are going to have to take the power that they've handed over to these madmen back, directly. The first stage of the revolution is the ideological revolution. That means that our first job is to wake people up. To achieve this, we must build networks of awareness. It's time to connect the activist groups, the Facebook pages, the bloggers, the alternative media. It's time to build lines of communication that cross these artificial borders of left and right. It's time to find that common ground, that unifying idea that will enable us to face our common enemy, and which will lay the framework for what comes next. We must reach a critical mass of awakening, because that's when these networks of awareness become networks of resistance. Our network must reach into every aspect of society, especially the police and military. The police and military are the enforcement arm of this mafia. Without them, the powers that be have no power at all. We must show them that they're being tricked, that they are not being sent to fight for freedom. Nor do the American people or the Syrian people want this war. Only 9% of the US population support strikes against Syria. 91% oppose it. Who wants this war? A handful of narcissistic psychopaths and useful idiots. You really want to bleed for them? History will remember the real heroes of this crisis as being the ones that had the courage to face this corrupt chain of command and say, no, I will not comply. Some are already making this stand. Don't leave them standing alone.
Yes, believe it or not, this government has conspired against its own people on more than one occasion. So to go over just a few of the most shocking declassified government conspiracies, I'm joined by BTS producer Manuel Rapolo. What's going on, man? What is up, man?
Wait, I'm confused. We're not talking about reptilian Illuminati shapeshifters?
Man, did I give you the wrong
I brought my costume. I thought we were going to do it.
Put on the lizard head.
All right.
No, we're going to be talking about real conspiracies that have been declassified. There are so many to count, Manny. I know that we only picked out kind of the 5 craziest ones. Let's start with my favorite, Operation Northwoods.
Start with the craziest. Why not?
It was a plan presented from Robert McNamara, the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Kennedy. Obviously, we know at that time we were really irking for a reason to get into Cuba. So what was this all about?
Sure. So that's dead on, dead on. Well, the United States was really keen on going to war with Cuba. They needed the public support to do this. And really this, as far as conspiracy theories that have later on been revealed through declassified information, is really one of the scariest because it details what the United States is capable of just coming up with in terms of ideas. They needed the public support for a war with Cuba. This, of course, never happened, thank God, because of what they were doing was, what they were planning to do was really, really scary. They were talking about staged bombings in Cuba, fake landings by Cuban troops.
They were Florida, on U.S. soil.
Exactly. They were planning to blow up an American ship. There was plans to hijack and crash an airliner. So
that sounds familiar,
right? But I mean, this is all thanks to declassified information that we found out thanks to none other than Oliver Stone of all people, who through his film JFK, kind of re-galvanized that idea that we need to get the truth out about the JFK assassination conspiracy. 1997 comes around, 30 years after the assassination. And you've got, thousands and thousands of declassified documents titled Operations Northwoods. What is that? And come to find out that this was this huge conspiracy that was never carried out.
A false flag attack that never happened.
Right.
But the scariest part about this is that false flags are real and that this almost happened. I mean, it was presented all the way up in the chain of command up to the president.
Yeah, I mean,
thankfully Kennedy rejected it, but
I mean, false flags, we talk about these, they're so often dismissed as conspiracy theories. You can choose to buy into some or not, more recent ones, but you can look back in the historical thread. Remember the main,
this own government,
right? The Spanish-American War, the Mexican-American War. These were all started by false flag attacks.
Right, exactly. So it's not too crazy to talk about false flags as historical fact. MK Ultra. This is something kind of searching for the perfect truth serum here, thinking that was a possibility, and they just loved to dose people with acid, didn't they?
MK Ultra is one of the craziest ones. In fact, I've heard references to whether I don't know if the 60s counterculture influenced like MK Ultra or vis-a-vis, but they were experimenting with all kinds of psychotropic drugs, LSD, barbiturates as well. They were finding prostitutes, prisoners, the mentally ill, and they were experimenting with all kinds of crazy drugs on people. And I mean, you don't find out about this until much later on when it's found out that it was actually the CIA that was involved in doing this.
Right, and now the CIA has, I think, half of the world's acid supply, or LSD, I think, at least in this country. And it actually did spawn into the 60s, because it's funny to see that this actually started in the 50s. So you just picture FBI agents from the 50s dosing each other. I mean, it turned into this whole thing.
And if you've seen the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, that's actually a pretty good example of that's kind of a film adaptation of
and there was
more or
a
less
subsect of MK Ultra where it's called Operation Midnight Climax, where they're actually drugging kind of your average Joes and putting them in rooms with prostitutes and doing just crazy stuff behind two-way mirrors and really twisted stuff there.
Right, and it goes back to what you were saying, trying to develop that perfect truth serum.
I wonder if they got that through watching prostitutes. Let's talk about the craziest one, prohibition alcohol poisoning.
I hadn't even heard about. No, I'd heard about prohibition. I didn't know what was going on. So prohibition going on in the 1920s, thanks to the 18th Amendment, of course, banning the wholesale of alcohol in the United States. I had no idea until I started researching what the FBI was doing under directions of the U.S. Department of Treasury, which was to poison alcohol. And there was actually the New York City Medical Examiner at the time in 1926, Charles Norris. I wonder if they called him Chuck Norris. Never mind. Charles Norris actually said practically all the liquor that is sold in New York today is toxic. So it was known, even at the time, that the FBI, the government, was actually poisoning people Look, prohibition was absolutely unenforceable at the time. So the fact that
why don't we just kill them?
Yeah, exactly.
We're just gonna kill them.
We're just gonna kill them. No, it's crazy. The stuff that they were putting in here was methane, formaldehyde, ammonia, arsenic, kerosene, acetone. That's paint thinner.
Unbelievable. Let's move on to Tuskegee, the experiment on poor black citizens of the United States.
Oh, they were calling them simpletons at the time. They were picking out uneducated, poor black citizens at the time.
And it was basically infecting them with syphilis.
Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. This was going on between 1932 and 1972. They infected upwards of 400 individuals, many of them women. 28 people died directly from the disease. Several children were born with the disease. Of course, and it was horrible what they were doing to them. They were telling these people that, we're looking into this mysterious new disease. Many of them didn't even know what was going on. They were told that they were being administered an antidote, but really they were just given aspirin. And they were conducting all sorts of experiments to find out how syphilis affects the black population. Really, really awful things. And and keep in mind, this kept going well into the 70s, 1972, until it was discontinued. And it wasn't until 1997, under President Clinton, he was the first American president.
You know what? Let's stop actually administering syphilis to black populations. Let's just not do that. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
And we're sorry.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible.
And of course, Operation Mockingbird. This was a program that the CIA, FBI was inserting operatives within all the major media networks. I mean, we're talking about all of them. Yeah. Papers, publications. And the thing that my whole question is this still going on today? Because they've really permeated throughout the culture of the establishment media. And really, we see the establishment media today, they just parrot the establishment. I'm like, wait, has this gone full circle? Or did you guys do a really good job setting the foundation here?
It's absolutely right. Because, I mean, this is Cold War mentality. And as we know, Cold War mentalities permeated well into today. But what they were doing, they were bribing heads of major publications and mainstream, even for the time during the Cold War, the New York Times, Associated Press, Reuters, they were really getting through to this. And you ask, is this still going on today? Well, we can look at the last National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA 2013, has a provision in there that legalizes propaganda. We found out last year that Central Command was giving these what are they?
Sock puppet
accounts, up to 10 accounts per serviceman to kind of promote this pro-America propaganda in foreign
propaganda
countries.
Online.
Exactly. And I mean, do we really even need that?
There are very few people in the corporate media that I actually enjoy watching, and more than just for entertainment. Well, Rachel Maddow is one of those people. She's a seasoned anchor at MSNBC who has a powerful presentation and has made some epic rants. However, she also wouldn't be where she is if she didn't serve a particular role for the establishment. And as critical as she may be of Obama from time to time, at the end of the day, she's there to promote the Democratic Party, which she does quite well by not only conducting softball interviews with prominent politicians, but by fear-mongering her audience constantly about the GOP. Now, I'm not saying that the Republican Party doesn't deserve ridicule. What I am saying is that both parties are equally complicit in the disastrous policies that are destroying this country. But recently, Maddow has gone beyond her usual partisan politics and is connecting obscure dots to make some pretty startling conclusions in the wake of the Boston bombings.
The headline, and I think also in some ways the bottom line, of the Boston Marathon bombing has been that the reason for the bombing was radical Islam, that the bombers were inspired by the online Al-Qaeda magazines. They committed the bombing for the same cockamamie conspiratorial nonsense that we've all had to become so familiar with. But if this new reporting from the BBC and the Wall Street Journal is correct, That may not have been the only conspiratorial nonsense radicalism that was at work here. I mean, really, pick your poison, right? I mean, it's the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which Tamerlan Tsarnaev also apparently had a nice copy of. It's the Protocols of Zion, or it's 9/11 Truth, or it's what Anwar al-Awlaki sold to Nidal Malik Hassan. There's always been an appeal to this necrotizing conspiracy theory radicalism, which almost always butts up against justifying violence,
Wow. So according to Maddow, conspiracy theories are almost always used as justification for violence. And the Tsarnaev brothers were not radicalized by Islam alone, but were also by conspiracy theories, namely those regarding 9/11. Of course, she forgets to mention that Dzhokhar himself allegedly said that U.S. foreign policy was the motivating factor behind the attacks, but I digress. Then Maddow compares Anwar al-Awlaki's teachings to people who aren't satisfied with the official 9/11 story. Think about how dangerous that rhetoric is for 1 second. What does it say about the 9/11 victims' family members who are unfulfilled with the investigation? What about the countless millions of people around the world who are unsatisfied with what the government told us happened and why? Or how about the groups of firefighters, architects, scientists, and world leaders who have also expressed their doubts? Should they all be flagged as potential terrorist threats too? But look, this isn't the first time Rachel has acted as an echo chamber for the government's position on 9/11. She once dedicated a whole segment on her show just to promote it.
Two of the best things ever published about the 9/11 attacks are these two books. I think that was a really admirable approach to try to make widely accessible the findings of the 9/11 report. But the even better thing they did is that they published an official comic book of the same report. It's the official graphic novel, a graphic adaptation of the real 9/11 Commission report.
Awesome. Thanks for recommending the Commission report and its dumbed-down comic book version. Nothing like a cartoon to help digest the propaganda a little bit easier. But Maddow's not just selling propaganda. She's also character assassinating anyone who feels like we haven't been given the truth.
This was written specifically to take on the claims of the people who said that 9/11 didn't really happen, or that 9/11 was an inside job, that 9/11 was not actually an attack on our country, but was rather a hoax perpetrated by our government in order to enslave us or something. It didn't work. The 9/11 conspiracies have stood up to the facts disproving them. The 9/11 conspiracies have not gone away because they are too ideologically and, I think, emotionally satisfying to the people who espouse them.
Yeah, Rachel, because someone who wants the truth about why things are the way they are must believe that 9/11 either never happened or that it was a hoax or that the government completely engineered every facet in order to enslave humanity. Because apparently it's too hard to believe that this government would not care about the lives of human beings in order to advance geopolitical goals. Is it really too hard to believe the fact that Bush and his cabinet turned a blind eye to let the attacks happen or even ensure that they happened? According to Maddow, it's somehow more comforting for people to accept the view that the government would allow them to die to justify war. But wait a minute, is that exactly what she thinks?
That is why the new bombshell reporting by Kurt Eichenwald, which ran as an op-ed in today's New York Times, but is also in his new book, is so important. Mr. Eichenwald, in reporting for this new book, says it was not just that famous bin Laden determined to strike in the U.S. presidential daily briefing that the Bush administration received and ignored less than a month before 9/11, just over a month before 9/11. It was a whole series of presidential daily briefs, all through May and June and July of 2001, all warning of a planned major strike by al-Qaeda in the United States, which then, of course, ultimately happened in September of that year. There's a responsibility to get history right for its own sake, right?
Yes, Rachel, it is. And letting 9/11 happen is making it happen. And I commend you for being critical of war, critical of many of the empire's destructive policies. But until you start asking questions about what drives these policies, you're doing nothing more than perpetuating them.
And I tried hard to be proud of my service, but all I could feel was shame. And racism could no longer mask the reality of the occupation. These were people, these were human beings. I've since been plagued by guilt anytime I see an elderly man, like the one who couldn't walk, who he rolled onto a stretcher and told the Iraqi police to take him away. I feel guilt anytime I see a mother with her children, like the one who cried hysterically and screamed that we are worse than Saddam as we forced her from her home. I feel guilt anytime I see a young girl, like the one I grabbed by the arm and dragged into the street. We were told we were fighting terrorists. The real terrorist was me, and the real terrorism is this occupation. Racism within the military has long been an important tool to justify the destruction and occupation of another country. It has long been used to justify the killing, subjugation, and torture of another people. Racism is a vital weapon employed by this government. It is a more important weapon than a rifle, a tank, a bomber, or a battleship. It is more destructive than an artillery shell, or a bunker buster, or a Tomahawk missile. While those weapons are created and owned by this government, they are harmless without people willing to use them. Those who send us to war do not have to pull a trigger or lob a mortar round. They do not have to fight the war, they merely have to sell the war. They need a public who is willing to send their soldiers into harm's way. They need soldiers who are willing to kill and be killed without question. They can spend millions on a single bomb, but that bomb only becomes a weapon when the ranks in the military are willing to follow orders to use it. They can send every last soldier anywhere on earth, but there will only be a war if soldiers are willing to fight. And the ruling class, the billionaires who profit from human suffering, care only about expanding their wealth, controlling the world economy. Understand that their power lies only in their ability to convince us that war, oppression, and exploitation is in our interest. They understand that their wealth is dependent on their ability to convince the working class to die to control the market of another country. And convincing us to kill and die is based on their ability to make us think that we are somehow superior. Soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have nothing to gain from this occupation. The vast majority of people living in the U.S. have nothing to gain from this occupation. In fact, not only do we have nothing to gain, but we suffer more because of it. We lose limbs, endure trauma, and give our lives. Our families have to watch flag-draped coffins lowered into the earth. Millions in this country without health care, jobs, or access to education must watch this government squander over $450 million a day on this occupation. Poor and working people in this country are sent to kill poor and working people in another country to make the rich richer. And without racism, soldiers would realize that they have more in common with the Iraqi people than they do with the billionaires who send us to war. I threw families onto the street in Iraq, only to come home and find families thrown onto the street in this country, in this tragic and unnecessary foreclosure crisis. We need to wake up and realize that our real enemies are not in some distant land. They're not people whose names we don't know and cultures we don't understand. The enemy is people we know very well and people we can identify. The enemy is a system that wages war when it's profitable. The enemy is the CEOs who lay us off from our jobs when it's profitable. It's the insurance companies who deny us health care when it's profitable. It's the banks who take away our homes when it's profitable. Our enemy is not 5,000 miles away. They are right here at home. If we organize and fight with our sisters and brothers, we can stop this war, we can stop this government, and we can create a better world.